For 20 years, we've been creating innovation in the CX industry, and now we're seeking out brilliant new perspectives on CX you just won't find anywhere else. I'm Richard Owen. Welcome to the CX Iconoclast. Is customer experience re-engineered for a modern world? Well, today we're not just discussing CX, we're dissecting it, peeling back some of the layers, perhaps decades even, to expose some of the shifts in CX, the importance of customer data, and the evolving roles that now hinge on that data. And who could be better than to guide us through this journey than today's episode guests, Ralph Oliva and Liam Fahey. Ralph, a professor of marketing at Penn State University, a director of the Institute of Study for Business Markets, brings his rich experience from his time from Texas Instruments and his extensive research in B2B market communication strategies, ingredient branding, and distribution channel management. On the other hand, we have Liam Fahey, a man whose consulting, teaching, writing, and research have helped numerous companies win in the marketplace through enhanced intelligence and insight. With an extensive academic background, over 30 years of practical experience across various industries, Liam brings a unique perspective to our discussion. Now, despite their different backgrounds and paths, both of them understand the importance of leveraging insights and intelligence to enhance customer experience, whether it's Ralph's focus on B2B market communications or Liam's emphasis on generating and leveraging marketplace intelligence and insights. They both recognize the critical role of data in shaping CX strategies. So, what valuable insights can we learn from the wealth of knowledge accumulated over decades of experience? Well, as you'll hear today, we can unlock, I think, a lot of wisdom and apply it to delivering exceptional customer experience. So, welcome, Liam and Ralph. Thanks for joining us. I think that obviously the mutual connection here is ISBM, which is just a fantastic organization, and I've had the pleasure of being involved with for many years. But let me start here, and I think perhaps I'd like to start with Liam, because there was an article which you published, which I think was very relevant to people who are listening in here, Driving Customer Insight, 4 questions that leaders should ask. Perhaps you could start by, well, maybe, spoiler alert, what are the 4 questions that leaders should ask?
Well, this set of 4 questions came out of a lot of work, working with a variety of companies where they're doing lots of analysis, but in many instances, the analysis didn't seem to get anywhere. We ended up with reams of data, spreadsheets all over the place, presentations that were 100 slides or more going on for 2 hours. And it struck me that from a leader's point of view, some of the key questions were not being asked. And the first simple question we always asked was, what's the new understanding? What's the understanding here that we didn't have before? Okay. So what was the new customer need we have? What was the new way of getting to customers? What was taking place in the market that we saw as new and different from previous work that we had done? And that question gets at the bottom of a lot of analysis that gets missed when we do the big data diving. And the second question we always asked was, how different is the new understanding from the old understanding? So to give you an example, in one company, we had the understanding that a customer need was all about the functionality of the product. And the company worked hard and mighty for a long number of years to develop new functionality in the product, make the product much more application friendly at the user end. But when we got into it, what we discovered was that it wasn't so much functionality. That was taken as table stakes. What customers were really interested in was building a relationship with the provider so that they could work collaboratively to build the next generation of product. And so when we looked at the new understanding that was totally different than the old understanding, that led into the third question, which was, what are the implications of it for how we think about business? And the fourth question was, what are the action and strategy implications? Let me take the third question first. Very often, key assumptions and beliefs are never well articulated, yet they drive the whole perspective on the business. So if you're assuming that functionality is your key driver of customer need, and it turns out to be relationship and emotions, you've totally missed the boat and left yourself wide open to competitors come in and build that relationship with customers, give the customer, table stakes, quote unquote, in terms of good functionality, but missed the boat entirely on building the relationship. And then the last fourth question was, what are the implications for decisions and actions? So you've gone through the first three questions. Then the question is, what does this mean for marketing, or what customers we reach, how we reach them, the images we create in our marketing or distribution channels, the value we want to create to customers, and then the last one is the action plan to put all that in place. That's the four questions that we've eventually arrived at to take analysis from data to implications.
Listen, I got a message on my screen here, Richard, that I guess I should reflect to you. It's saying browser preventing recording. The host should stop the recording for all. Da 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 da. So I don't know. I really don't know how to react.
Well,
I didn't want to interrupt.
It says here try just refreshing the page first. Maybe do a page refresh.
Okay. Well, let's see. My camera.
All right, give it a second, I think, as it refreshes, it'll log in back in.
Sorry, Richard, my throat is still at me.
Okay, I'm back, Richard. I'm sorry about that. I don't know if it was I uploaded the very latest version of Chrome last night just to make sure that I was on the latest version, and I'm not sure what I'm doing incorrectly.
But no problem. It's working now.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt Liam.
So thanks for that. So just Liam, just picking up on those questions. I'd love to get Ralph's reaction to this as well. The one that really struck me was this tendency, and I think it's true especially true in Silicon Valley, to think that what the customer definitively values is feature. At the end of that, and that comes from an engineering mindset, right? But ultimately, it's something different. Ralph, I see you shaking your head. Or nodding, perhaps. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, when listen, Liam's insight, discipline is important, and he gets to the core of just to what from the point of view of the customer in terms of really understanding. Are you listening beyond the functional needs of the customer, which business to business customers love to dwell on, but getting to the 5 to 7 people that make up a buying center in business to business. Are you touching each of them in ways that make sense to them? Are you building relationships? Are you creating customer experiences with those 5 to 7 people that are not only serving their functional needs, which are kind of fleeting and the easiest thing for competitors to catch up with? And in fact, if you compete that way, you're kind of heading toward price competition very quickly. But what about the emotional needs of the customer? I think in an extreme point of view, I've heard someone say B2B purchases are made to avoid blame. Okay. And they're big, and I think that's an extreme, but not necessarily an entirely off base sort of thing. I mean, these are big purchases. You're not buying toothpaste. You're buying hundreds of thousands of gallons of toothpaste ingredients. So in reality, how do I feel? And here's the important one. I learned this. How do I feel about myself when I engage with your firm? Am I feeling, is the experience I had convincing me that I've made a good decision, that I feel good about myself? Am I building a relationship here that I can count on? So Liam really, and I have been working on this as, the emotional component of value and the relational component of value, all of which sums up at the end of the day in a B2B engagement to the economic value. Really, is this going to help me reduce my cost or improve my top line? And does the experience I have with you convince me every time, all of these 5 to 7 people, I made the right decision? I feel good about what I've done.
So Liam, number one, nobody got fired for buying IBM, right? Which 30 years ago seemed to be true. I'm not sure today it would be as true. But fundamental risk aversion, career orientation, and features kind of secondary. Is that the big takeaway? Or what's the message to marketers here? Rethink where your focus is.
Well, another way of restating what Ralph took as true is the recognition that there is such a thing as a brand. Every company has brand. And if you don't think of emotions, there's really no such thing as brand. It's how people feel, and not so much about your company and your product, is how they feel about using your product and how they feel about themselves, both individually and as a team or as a group. So when you look at the purchasing criteria per se, and you dig into it, you go back to the 4 questions we just talked about. Um, the last question got to do with implications for what we do, is really preceded by the first 3 questions. And if you don't address those first 3 questions, you don't get to implications at the back end that make a difference. So you're looking at actions that make a difference to your performance, and performance viewed from many perspectives, one of which is functionality, another of which is relationships with the customer, and the emotion side, all of which lead back to the economic implications that Ralph mentioned at the end. Okay? And that raises some interesting questions about determining what the economic implications are that maybe we can get into later on.
Yeah, and by the way,
So
I can build on that. There's recent research on that. And I'm looking around here because whenever I should have gotten this before we got on the air, but we've just finished updating at the Institute for the Study of Business Markets, the Business to Business Marketing Handbook, which is a collection of writings from ISBM fellows like Liam, intended primarily for academics so that they can build on the work in the handbook and they can take new research forward. But one of the people that is another ISBM fellow is Dr. Kevin Keller from Dartmouth, who has built a well-known model on how brands build equity and what happens over time as brands build value that can become part of the offering. Anyway, his most recent research across business-to-business firms say, yeah, building brand equity can and it does be built by offerings that have greater functional value, that beat competitors in terms of line by line on things that B2B people tend to care about, like specs. But he said, but the real differentiating feature is what he calls on the right-hand side of his model. Are you building feelings for that of security? Are you building a relationship? And his research shows that ultimately, as we move forward, that is the way to compete. On the right-hand side of his model, which is very well known, Kevin Keller's pyramid. Anyone listening to this podcast can look it up. May already know it because it's kind of a classic in terms of looking to how you build equity. The new research, though, is that what he's seen in terms of B2B firms that are successful and profitable and growing is they've stressed this side of the brand relationship. Much, much tougher. The more right brain side of it, much tougher to compete against. And a key to building customer lifetime value. And he said also kind of counterpoint to a lot of business to business thinking, because again, like myself, I'm a physicist, not a marketer by education. So I tend to love to get engaged in all of these particular more tangible things about the offering. And it turns out this brand relationship. The other thing is, just to build on what Liam was saying, the brand relationship can touch the business to business customer across the 5 to 7 people that you're having to influence in most B2B buys. The business to business customer is not one person. It's a team.
But to build on what Ralph just said, nothing we're saying here should take away from the importance of functionality. It really is a table stakes. And the other things we're talking about, relationship, emotion, brand, etc., are the ultimate differentiators, assuming you're reasonably good on the functionality side. And indeed, we've got several examples where the functionality, quote unquote, is not as good as a rival, but customers still buy from you because you've built a better relationship. Emotionally, they're more in tune with
Right.
you, etc. So people do tend
Right.
to walk away with us saying, well, you're not emphasizing functionality enough. No, it still has to be there.
Well, and back to the IBM example, certainly early in my career, when I wouldn't have said IBM was necessarily the functionality that people thought was at the best. They were always a lagging performer in terms of technology. When you think about how that applies to the sort of Geoffrey Moore crossing the chasm model, which obviously in the technology industry is very popular. It's sort of, if you start to look at that through the lens of early adopters and late adopters, because doesn't to some extent that valuation of relationships and security, which is part of that equation, doesn't that make a strong argument for why late adopters are late adopters? You could say that early adopters, in some extent, are willing to trade off that security, that job risk, for potential gain. Is it a different psychology of buyer, do you think, or is it just different scenario?
Having lived through I worked at Texas Instruments for many years, and occasionally our blazing new functionality was actually terrifying certain parts of the buying community out there with our customers, because they're going, oh yeah, this is so new and so great, you won't be able to make it. So we'll design your new chip into our offering, and then you'll give us the bad news a few months down the road. So in some cases, they were just tangibly looking at the performance of the semiconductor industry and saying, yeah, this is a new thing, but I'm going to wait the requisite 3 or 4 months till your wafer fab is producing at a higher rate of yield. And so sometimes it was a very rational sort of reason why the chasm was there. So, okay, we don't believe you're going to be able to make it in quantities we need. But then there are these emotional things too. There were times that, and we did an interesting psychographic segmentation, Richard, when we were just launching digital signal processors, and discovered that we were selling them like mad to young engineers, and the older engineers weren't buying. And we look, and the young engineers are saying, "Well, I'm supposed to be making my mark. I'm here. I'm expected to take risks. I'm okay if I make a mistake. I want to know. I got to be known for running with the big dogs. So yeah, I'm willing to take a chance on this because I can produce a whole new offering ahead of competition. And if I get bit later on, no problem." But meanwhile, the customers that we relied on, the bread and butter customers, they were having deep discussions with our salespeople, particularly the people in the buying center, going, "Look, just let me know, and this is, by the way, in terms of customer experience, it's one of the things I think that just maybe it's because of my age. That was a person-to-person deep discussion. I'm relying on you to let me know when this supply has stabilized, okay? And I'm not talking necessarily to Texas Instruments. I'm talking to you, Ralph Oliva. You know me. We've worked together for a while, so don't put me on the hook. And I think that part, it's interesting. I have discussions with people on B2C versus B2B, and they say, well, B2C is so personal. You're involved in people's lives and everything, and B2B is so technical. And that is so totally wrong. B2B is intensely personal. You know every customer. You know their children's birthdays. You know things about them. And the customer experience there is very much person to person and personal. And yes, you have to have superior functionality, but you have to back that up with the other things that the buying center is worried about, which is, can you make it? Will you dedicate capacity to us? How will pricing work on this? And basically, do I trust you? And so you're
people
talking
buy
about,
from people, right?
that's exactly. And
at the end of the day.
So
I think that's an interesting comment. The B2C comparison is fascinating because what we've always looked at when we looked at CX data was higher NPS, for example, amongst consumer brands, right? So people demonstrated higher affinity for those brands, which people always assumed as a more intrinsic emotional connection. But I think you're right in saying that, look, people are gambling their livelihoods and their careers in these relationships versus, oh, I bought the wrong model of iPod. Okay,
Yep.
right? We'll all move on, right? I can understand with a large purchase like a car, yeah, you got a little bit more at stake here, but we're really this notion of B2B being intensely personal is very interesting.
But to put this in a slightly broader context, from a B2B perspective, you're selling into companies that have cultures. You need to really understand the prevailing culture inside that customer organization. I'll give you two quick examples. You're selling into one customer which has a very risk-oriented culture from top to bottom, much, much more willing to work with you and take a chance on what it is you're offering them and work with you in a collaborative way. If you're selling into another culture which is highly risk-averse, then you've got to really have dotted every I and T. Because you're going to convince them this darn thing really does work. We're going to build a relationship with you that we're promising, etc., etc. They're two very different worlds. And if you have salespeople selling into those two different worlds who are not culturally attuned, you can really end up with a lot of egg on your face from the perspective of the customers.
Yeah,
and it's interesting then when you think about industries that are under attack from startups. So what popped into my head when you were saying that was financial services industries.
Yeah.
Typically very conservative. But that opens the door to new entrants, right? Because at the end of the day, new entrants who have nothing to lose are going to be much more aggressive at offering and slicing off a section of the market that is less risk averse. That risk averse culture translates often into offering products and services that just look dated, doesn't it?
Yeah, somebody told me the other day that JP Morgan Chase were investing something like $16 billion with a B, $1 billion in upgrading their technologies over a 3-year period. Now, a major reason for that kind of investment is that their competitors in many of their single businesses are coming at them from an internet base. They have very little in physical assets. What they have is an offer going after their customers and providing a very different kind of relationship. Sometimes actually it's costing the customers more, but they're willing to work with those new entrants because of the speed of delivery, the flexibility they provide, the way they can manage the options that they're actually purchasing. Whereas going to the legacy firms, the door is shut in their face when they start talking about flexibility. It's just not how they operate.
I'd like to change gears if I could for a second and ask a broader question about B2B marketing from the perspective of two guys who've been tracking this for a long time, both through ISBM and also through all your research. How would you characterize the biggest changes in B2B marketing over, say, the last, let's choose the last 10, 20-year period, and you pick if you think there's a particular period of transformation. But when you cast your mind back, what are the biggest changes we've seen?
Well, there have been many, but what's interesting too is in answering that question, though, that it's also what stayed the same. But I think some of the biggest changes, again, is that now, and one of the things we're dealing with is this 5 to 7 person buying center, and that number is kind of tracked and is growing up. Each person in the buying center is now equipped with a whole bunch of tools, including the latest tools of generative AI. So what we've seen is that, that one of the things that B2B marketers and salespeople have traditionally had to tune into was what is the buying process going on inside my customer's firm. Now, again, I was used to selling tangible parts to electronic companies. And the fact is, you needed to know when the design cycle for their next offering was coming and how to intercept that and how to work with it. Well, now all of the people involved all have ways to go to bring new ideas, new information, and new offerings. And by the way, looking at generative AI, some of them may be real, some of them may not be real at the current state of generative AI. So what's happened is that in one of the big changes I've seen is that the buying process can get clogged inside firms. And there was a great article on this that used a term I love, and that people go off in open-ended learning loops that tend to choke the buying process as it's going along. And this has actually set the stage for salespeople to be much more interventive in terms of understanding where these roadblocks have happened, that the new tools that are available, and I mean, you could say Google's been around a long, long time, and that's part of it. But now, of course, there are new generative AI tools that people can use to scrape the web in whole different ways in terms of what else can we do? Who else should we work with? Where are we going? So I believe that's a change, is that as technology continues to impinge on the complex buying process inside a B2B firm, marketers and salespeople have to recognize that and move on. The other thing that's remarkable, Richard, looking at ISBM over 25 years and over maybe 100 companies, is there's this cycle going on that seems to be speeding up in terms of the role of marketing inside B2B firms. There's this 5 to 7 year harmonic going on, where on the harmonic upswing, firms are stressing growth. They're working. Marketing is a very, very important part of the firm, and the firm is very market and customer focused. Then something happens, and the pendulum begins swinging in the other direction. And I'm seeing that happening with greater speed now. It's maybe not 5 years, maybe that's shrinking down. And that's a change that's concerning to me, because all of a sudden cost becomes the real issue. Wall Street has become the focus. And all of a sudden, the role of marketing in helping a firm grow starts being denigrated. And in fact, from the finance point of view, well, we're doing just fine. Why do we need all these expensive marketing people? Let's just make our bottom line look really, really good. Now, this is actually where the cycle is really speeding up, as you'd expect it is, in firms that are owned by private equity. When they're getting ready to, make a change or flip a firm, then they can make things look very pretty by firing the whole marketing department. And if the marketing department has done a good job, they may have 2 or 3 years of coast that they can rely on. But the buyer beware, this becomes a real caveat emptor for the buying company that looks inside and says, boy, this firm I just bought is running like a watch, but it'll never grow. There are no growth engines.
The future prospects are unreflected in historical performance, right? Which is, you could argue, the optimal time to sell any asset, right? If you're an investor, you always want to sell when the future looks a lot bleaker than the past, and you have essentially inside knowledge to that effect. Liam, what are your thoughts on the last 20 years?
I take a slightly different cut than Ralph did. I think you have to start with the distinction between marketing as a function and marketing as a perspective. And the companies that are doing really good marketing in B2B and elsewhere, they don't think of marketing as a function, as a set of people with a marketing label who do marketing things. They think of marketing as an organization-wide phenomenon, culture, way of thinking, way of doing, way of acting. And that's the saving grace of marketing going into the future, as far as I'm concerned. If marketing is left to the marketing function, you're DOA, you're dead on arrival. Okay. If marketing is taken as a way of doing things, a perspective and approach, okay, or the finance people, the human resource people, or supply chain people are all thinking about what's the implication from a market perspective. So you're market managing as opposed to marketing. That to me is the only salvation that's available for marketing going from the past into the future. And I think what's really caught marketing as a function is that a fair number of companies over the last 10 years were doing really well with marketing as a function, and then ran into earthquakes caused by marketplace change and turbulence, and discovered that their marketing was much too isolated, much too focused on existing products. Stated differently, if marketing is not about creating new business opportunity, it shouldn't exist.
Yeah, and I by the way, I would put in a plug here for a friend of ours who's another ISBM fellow, Dr. Bernie Jaworski at Claremont. who has really taken on the issue of defining some of these terms, mission, vision, purpose, and culture, and really providing some texture to how can you make these things more than just words, and what does it really mean? I think building on Liam's understanding of where is the culture of your firm and where is it headed? And in frankly, in business to business, there are some firms who really kind of jump out ahead and really are taking the kind of perspective that Liam is talking about. Unfortunately, though, I don't think it sticks. There's so much market turbulence going on that even the culture itself, it seems to be changing more quickly than it used to inside business to business firms. Firms that are market focused and do have the kind of culture that Liam is addressing do better. And there's a lot, Richard, you've seen a lot of things are being written about that. Do you know what the company's purpose is? Have you, like Simon Sinek's stuff on Start With Why? And there are a lot more focus going on now at, I know one of our alums, Tom Boudet at Penn State, has given us a challenge to talk about brands with purpose. And really, do you understand fundamentally why your firm was created and what your purpose is? And I think occasionally, what we find is firms have lost their way along that line, that, it's the focus on the market and customers is where we create value functionally, emotionally, relationally, and economically. And that's an important focus that needs to continue, particularly in every experience you have with a B2B firm. You need to be thinking along those dimensions in terms of, does the experience we're creating now enhance our connection with this customer along those 4 dimensions?
One implication of this, by the way, for marketing professionals is that they need to be able to talk the language of the other functions. In a marketing group, they cannot meet and talk with the finance group in finance terms and finance technology. You've lost before you started. So the capacity to take marketing programs, marketing investment in brand, and translate it into its financial implications, that onus should be on the marketing professional, not on the finance group. And then you can have a conversation with the finance, accounting, and control people in their terms, in their language. And that's where the 2 realms can meet. But in part, it has to be driven by the marketing professionals. And Ralph and I have done a lot of work with a lot of different companies where the marketers look at us as if we're from a different planet. When we talk about having the capacity to do financial analysis on the same level, at the same caliber as the finance accounting people, it simply becomes a must. Otherwise, you're conceding the game before you start.
Well, it builds off that idea of marketing as a mindset as opposed to a function. And
Absolutely.
I was in a conversation the other day, and we were talking about buying roles in enterprises. And one of the observations was, aside from the chief financial officer and the CEO, the CMO is sort of the last job that's remained intact, in the sense that it hasn't morphed into a whole bunch of different functions. It's still a very narrow functional job in most companies. If you said to someone, what's a CMO? They'd say, well, I pretty much guess what the responsibility is, and you'd be right. Whereas on the sales side, you have chief revenue officers whose role can vary enormously now from, strategies to develop a customer versus whether or not it's acquisition centered, or are they really doing account-based selling or account-based marketing? So those jobs have become very fungible and very subdivided within businesses. There's multiple people, there's multiple splits, but the marketing jobs sort of stayed sort of self-defined. In some ways, what I'm hearing from you is, that's going to change. There was going to be a different role. And if it doesn't change in some ways, it faces obsolescence. If it stays sort of narrow and parochial, it's going to really run into trouble.
I mean, if you talk to a lot of CMOs in their more honest moments, they'll tell you that what they do and how they do it has to do with working with and through their equivalent peers. So you're working with supply chain folks, you're working with human relations, you're working with finance people, and they have to have that capacity to collaborate and work with them and drive that market-oriented focus that we talked about earlier on. And that simply can't be done, I don't believe, by the narrow version of a CMO job that we might have had around 10 years ago.
Yeah, and the CMOs that we continue to work with, I think that this term fungibility becomes a characteristic that's, you're looking for changes. That's a change too, in that in many, many ways, and rather than having the what might be viewed as the more traditional cadre of things that a CMO does in terms of managing the brand and doing other things, that's important too. But what they're really doing in many cases is very flexibly finding ways to help different business units solve very specific problems that are coming at them thick and fast, and providing resources to business units that, and it's almost like an internal agency sort of thing, providing resources that can jump on an issue and help them untie it with resources that they can't afford in the business unit to have day in and day out on their balance sheet. So that this idea of I look at a few CMOs, their fungible bench is what they're looked for. And that role, the idea that, well, I can, what does the CMO do? He or she helps me out when I'm in trouble. And then they go away. Okay. And they attend to things that I can't attend to, the brand at the corporate level, corporate spokesperson kind of stuff, and some stuff that does address other issues, other audiences that I can't address as a business unit person. So I think the nature of the CMO role is being, a flexible tactician who really, can run in and help as different business units inside, particularly big B2B firms that we work with all the time at ISBM, deal with the current environment, the VUCA, volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity and ambiguity that are creeping through so many markets now. And
it's a fascinating angle. I think this is probably a good place for us to draw a line on the conversation. Gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure as ever. Thank you very much for sharing your observations, and look forward to continue to learn more and see both in your research and through ISBM. So thank you both very much.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, Richard.
Glad to do it.
Thanks for listening to the CX Iconoclast from OCX Cognition. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you won't miss any of our thought-provoking conversations. And please get in touch if you want to learn more about what OCX Cognition's predictive CX analytics platform can do for your business by providing complete insights into every account, continuously updated and connected to operations. You'll find contact info in the show notes.